This helpful guide was made possible through the support from our friends at Squarespace. The ultimate setup guide for the Sony a6400. I promise I'll make this as painless and easy to understand as possible. Be sure to check the description box below for time codes as well as some frequently asked questions if you're on a time crunch. In this video, we'll be doing two things. Number one, I'll be doing a very general walkthrough of the entire menu. Now, depending on a topic, I may already have or will have a video expanding on it, which will be either available up here in the cards or in the description box below. The second thing I would do is give you guys my best recommended custom button and quick function menu settings, specifically for photography, video and filmmaking, and hybrid shooting. By the way, if you're new around here, I do a lot of reviews and tutorials specifically on Sony Alpha cameras, so subscribe to get the best recommendation and grasp of your gear, because you can't go wrong with Jason Vong. With that said, get your Sony a6400 ready, because we're going in deep. Okay, couple of things if you're new to the Sony ecosystem. If at any point you see an option that's grayed out on your menu, just change it to a video or photo mode on your dial. If there's an icon next to an option, it just tells you what this certain option affects, either photo or video. With that said, go ahead and press the menu button and we're on tab 1, page 1. Starting off with file format, without going into a debate between shooting RAW or JPEG, I'll make this simple for you. If you're not planning on editing a lot of photos or even at all, just shoot JPEG only. The images that will come out will look exactly as how you will see it in camera. However, if you're striving to be a professional or you want to edit your photos on a computer, shoot RAW. RAW gives you a lot more latitude in editing to fix or even enhance your photos. I, however, personally shoot both, but I do tend to use the JPEG more when it comes to quick social media posts. Moving on to JPEG quality and image size. Go with extra fine and 24 megapixels for the highest quality. In terms of aspect ratio, 3:2 will give you the most resolution. You can always crop down to 16:9 or 1:1 on your phone or an editing software. By the way, if you do end up choosing 16:9 or 1:1, this only affects JPEG, but not the RAW files. Moving on to panorama. Again, it's grayed out because I'm not in that mode. Just turn the dial to panorama and you should be able to mess with the settings. Panorama is a great way to capture a large landscape without needing an ultra wide angle lens. Just follow the on-screen prompt, or if you need to, you can change the direction of how the camera captures the panorama. Moving on to tab 1, page 2, long exposure and high ISO NR. NR stands for noise reduction. This helps if you're shooting a very dark scene and don't plan on doing any edits. If you plan on editing the photos, I would have these features turned off because you can always do the noise reduction yourself. If you're a time-lapse photographer, turn this off. This will slow down your camera's processing. Color space, keep it sRGB and don't worry about lens compensation. Moving on to tab 1, page 3, the first 3 options in this page, I wouldn't worry about it. If you want the camera to do most of the work for you, just set the dial to auto and press the trash can button and it will walk you through what each of these scenes do. Moving on to drive mode, this is where you set how many photos your camera will take. You have several options once you click on drive mode. Single shooting, which only takes one shot, high-speed continuous, which takes multiple shots, and this would be good for sports or fast-moving subjects. You can also change it to low, medium, or high-speed plus burst as well. Self-timer, self-explanatory. You also have an option for the camera to snap multiple shots with the timer on the next option. BRK stands for bracketing. This is a little more advanced, so we'll have to save this for another time. Moving on to interval shoot function. This is for high quality 4K plus time lapses. This will require you to put hundreds or thousands of images together and make a movie out of it. Although the shoot process is relatively easy, putting all of the photos together is a little more advanced, which I will not show in this video. If you're interested, YouTube a few tutorials on time-lapse or LR time-lapse if you want to be a pro. I can show you later in this video an easier and faster way to do time lapses, albeit lesser quality. But we'll still go over this time lapse part here very quickly. Feel free to skip to the next section if you don't plan on doing any time lapses. The first option here, you want to turn this on to activate time lapse shooting. The start time means when it will start shooting after you hit the shutter. My suggestion is 2. Shooting interval means the time in between the next shot before the camera fires off again. Number of shots means how many shots you want in total. A good rule of thumb is figuring out how long you want your time lapse to be and what frame rate you'll be editing in. For example, I want a 10-second time lapse and I'll be editing in a 24 frames per second timeline. In my case, each second is 24 frames, therefore to have a 10-second time lapse, I will need to shoot 240 shots. Math, am I right? AE tracking sensitivity. AE stands for auto exposure. If you're using any auto exposure settings, the time-lapse feature will take that into account and adjust the brightness for you for a gradual change in light, so the time-lapse will look a lot smoother. You can change the sensitivity from low to medium to high. Silent shooting interval. If this is off, you'll hear the shutter go chick, 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 chick every time it takes a photo. If you want it to silently take hundreds of photos, enable this. Now be warned though, there is a slight chance silent shooting might have some weird effect on your photos depending on what you're shooting. If it looks off to you, don't use it. The best way to test this out is to shoot a couple of photos first and see. So let's go ahead and skip on over to tab 1, page 4. Actually, I'll show you how to program memory recall later. Let's go ahead and skip on over to tab 1, page 5, focus mode. In this mode, you have several options, AFS and AFA. S stands for single and A stands for automatic. These two focus modes are going to stay locked in that one specific area when you half press the shutter until you let go. So even if you move around, the focus will not shift unless you half press the shutter again. AFC stands for autofocus continuous. Focus will continually shift around in a wide or specific area that you choose until you let go of the shutter. And in this mode, if you move around, the focus will follow. Personally, I'm in this mode 90% of the time. MF stands for manual focus. You can manually focus the subject yourself with the focus ring on your lens, and it will automatically be in this mode if you're using a manual focus lens only. DMF is a hybrid of autofocus and manual focus. It will autofocus for you first when you half press the shutter, but you have the option to manual focus yourself after. For priority set in autofocus S and autofocus C, just leave these as balance emphasis. Moving on to focus area, this just helps narrow down a specific part of your screen for your camera to focus on. I have an extensive guide on how and when to use these focus areas, so go ahead and click up here in the cards to check it out or in the link in the description box below. But just really briefly for this video, wide looks at the entire frame of your screen to pick focus on a subject that's either closest to it or sticks out the most. Zone is when you want to start narrowing down a part of your screen for your camera to focus on. Center just means the camera will focus only on the center. Spot is when you want to narrow down the focus even more. You can use spot focus to specifically specify a point on your screen to focus on. Man, who wrote this garbage? But yeah, spot, you can use spot to specify a point on your screen to focus on. Moving on to focus area limiter, you can actually remove certain focus areas if you don't use them often, like I did. Next up is switch vertical/horizontal autofocus area. Now this is helpful because you can have different focus areas set to a certain spot of your frame for different shooting orientations, landscape or portraits. If you go back and forth a lot, this can save you a lot of time, especially if you're a portrait or wedding photographer. Moving on to tab 1, page 6, AF illuminator. This is where a beam shoots out of your camera to help you focus on a subject that is in a very dark situation. Now this can be helpful, but it can also be very distracting as well, depending where you use it. You definitely don't want to be using this at a concert. Next up is face/eye AF set. Now eye autofocus is defaulted to the center button of the camera. I'll show you how to change that later. Here is where you turn on face priority so the camera will focus on faces. Right/left eye. Leave this on auto for now. I'll show you how to set this up later for easier access. Face detection frame display. Make sure this is turned on so you know which face the camera is focusing on in case there are multiple faces in the shot. AF with shutter. If you're a beginner, just leave this on. If you're coming from Canon or Nikon and you're used to back button focusing, you can leave this off. Just make sure to set one of your custom buttons to have AF on later. Pre-AF, just go ahead and leave this on. I start AF, I wouldn't worry about this. It will always say invalid with this lens for whatever reason. Eye autofocus will still work regardless of this option. AF area registration, yeah, I wouldn't worry about this. Moving on to tab 1, page 7. Delete registration AF area, don't worry about that. Display continuous autofocus area. Leave this on so you can see where your focus is going when you're in autofocus continuous mode. Circulation of focus point, I wouldn't worry about this. Autofocus micro adjustment, I would skip this too. Moving on to tab 1, page 8, exposure compensation. Now this only works if you have one of the following in auto mode: shutter, aperture, or ISO setting. More on this later. ISO. This digitally brightens or darkens your shot, especially helpful for when you have the shutter speed and the aperture dialed in and you don't want to change any of those. Now, I personally would not go past ISO 6400 with this camera because you'll start seeing noise or grain in your photos or videos, which doesn't look that good in my opinion. Now, everyone's noise tolerance level is different. You might be okay going up to 32,000 ISO. I would suggest playing with these settings yourself and see what you like. Now within it, you can do auto ISO. You can help your camera decide the best ISO to use and set a limit so it won't go below and over a certain number. This is where you combine it with exposure compensation. You can tell the camera to overexpose a little bit or underexpose it a little bit because you're in auto ISO. Moving on to metering mode, do multi. Now this looks at the entire scene brightness on your screen and gives you a reading on whether it's over or underexposed via the meter here on the bottom. Face priority in multimeter. Turn this on. This ensures the camera prioritizes exposure reading on your face above all else. Spot metering point, I would leave this on center. Exposure step, mostly everybody keeps at 0.3 EV. Moving on to tab 1, page 9, AEL with shutter. I would set this on auto. AEL stands for auto exposure lock. Again, when you have shutter speed, aperture, or ISO set to auto, this will lock in your exposure setting when you have pressed the shutter. Exposure, STD, adjust, I would skip that. Tab 1, page 10, I'm gonna skip all of the flash stuff for another video. Tab 1, page 11. White balance. Okay, how am I going to explain white balance? Now, depending on where you're shooting, maybe in the shade or a cloudy day or a super bright sunny day or even indoors, they have helpful icons here that tells you which is the best to use in certain condition to give you the best color. But the good rule of thumb is just to use whichever one looks the best to you. Now, this part is more important for video shooters and JPEG shooters to get it right in camera. If you're shooting raw, just leave it on auto because you can always change it in post. Now, there's no shame in using auto if you're a beginner. Just try to use one of these whenever possible. That way the color of your footage and your pictures stay consistent, especially when you're color grading. If you ever feel fancy enough for yourself, you can also dial in a specific number. Priority set in auto white balance. I would keep this on standard. Ooh, okay, this part right here is a little tricky, but I'm gonna do my best. DRO, auto, HDR, creative style, picture profile. Okay, so DRO stands for Dynamic Range Optimizer. Now, I always get asked on my YouTube channel, what's the best color settings for photo or the best picture profile for videos? So here's what you need to know. If you are new to this whole photography or videography thing, do not worry about picture profile. Keep DRO on auto and creative style on standard. I've been shooting like this for the last year and I've gotten a lot of compliments about my colors in my videos. If you're shooting raw photos, none of these actually matters to you. Now, if you're a video shooter and you plan on color grading a lot, you have two options. Number one is PP9, which is the S-Log3 with the S-Log3 Cine Gamut profile. Now, this has been super popular on YouTube and for filmmakers out there. There are a ton of tutorials online on how to expose for S-Log and how to grade it, so go ahead and YouTube that when you have the time. Now, my personal favorite is actually Picture Profile 10, which has the Hybrid Log Gamma 2 profile. And I like to use this one whenever I'm shooting a very bright scene because this helps me retain a lot of dynamic range without jacking up my ISO. Go ahead and click up here for my full Hybrid Log Gamma workflow tutorial. Moving on to tab 1, page 12, soft skin effect. I personally turn this off because I have my own app to help smooth out my imperfection anyways. Shutter auto white balance lock, put this on continuous shooting so it keeps the same white balance throughout the photos when you're rapid firing away. Moving on to tab 1, page 13, this page pertains to assisting you when you're shooting in manual focus. I actually have a dedicated video on this already, so go ahead and click up here to queue it up. Tab 1, page 14, face registration. This tells the camera which face it should prioritize when it sees that particular person in frame. Now, I don't use this too much, but it's helpful for when you're shooting in a large group, but want to make sure the most important people are in focus. For example, if you're a wedding photographer, you want to register the bride and the groom's faces. Register faces priority, you want to have this on if you're planning on using face registration. Smile shutter, this is helpful for taking selfies. Once it detects a smile, it will automatically take a shot. Auto object framing, I would skip this. The camera decides what it thinks is the right composition after you take the photo, but it involves cropping, which will deteriorate the quality of your photo, so I would prefer to do the cropping myself. Self-portrait timer. Okay, so this is when you have the screen flipped up and you want to take a selfie. It will do a 2-second timer before it takes the photo. I would keep this on. Whew, okay, how are you feeling so far? We good? We need a break? Maybe a restroom break? You sure? You want me to keep going? Alright then, back to the menu. Okay, turn your dial to movie mode now. Exposure mode. I personally have this on manual. Most video guys will want to have this too. If you're vlogging and want the camera to decide all of the best settings for you, you can be an aperture priority. You just need to set the aperture and the camera will determine the rest for the best exposure. Now, I personally have my aperture settings between f2.8 to f4. S&Q exposure mode, we'll come back to this in a few seconds. File format. You got options of shooting either in 4K or 1080p. I do not recommend shooting in AVC HD. It is low quality. Only shoot in AVC HD if your computer cannot handle the other video files. Record settings. For 4K, you can shoot in 2 different frame rates, 24 or 30. In 1080p, you can shoot in 4 different frame rates, 24, 30, 60, or 120. Now, you'll see 50M or 100M next to the frame rate. Always choose the highest one available for the best quality. Without going into too much details on frame rate, just shoot in 24 frames and make sure your editing software, you set your timeline to 24 frames per second. You can use 1080p 60 or 120 as slow motion options. Just slow them down in your editing software. S&Q settings. S&Q stands for slow and quick. This function allows you to create either fast and easy time lapses or fast and easy slow motion videos. Wow, that's an oxymoron. But at a lower quality. Earlier, I mentioned there's an easier way to create time-lapse. This is it. Turn your dial to S&Q and set your S&Q exposure mode to manual. In the settings, you have an option to set your timeline frame rate to 24, 30, or 60. Again, I recommend 24. For time-lapse, do either between 1 to 15 frames, then hit the movie record button and record for however long you need. The camera will automatically create the time-lapse in playback without needing you to construct it yourself in editing. The reason why I say this one is lower quality is because the highest resolution for these time-lapses are only 1080p, and the frames themselves are not as clear as if you were to shoot hundreds or thousands of high-quality photos and constructing the time-lapse yourself later. However, the workflow through S&Q is much easier and has a quicker turnaround. For slow motion, do either 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second. Now keep in mind, doing slow motion in S&Q also yields lower quality videos and no audio recorded. Similar to S&Q time-lapse, the workflow again is a lot easier and has a quicker turnaround. Perfect for vloggers. If you're a serious video user and planning on color grading your slow motion clips as well, best to do it through the standard 1080p or 120 and slow it down yourself in post. Those will have more bitrate for you to work with so you can push the colors a little harder. Plus, you still retain your audio recording, which can be life-saving at times. And last on this page, proxy recording. This records smaller 720p files next to your high-quality 4K or 1080p videos. You can send these smaller files to your smartphone via Wi-Fi for quick social media posting. I will show you how later. Whew, okay, tab 2, page 2, AF drive speed and tracking sensitivity. These two control how responsive and how fast the camera focuses. I recommend normal and standard to start off first. If it's too slow or too fast, just change one of these settings. Auto slow shutter, don't worry about this. Initial focus magnification, keep it 1x. Audio recording, always keep this on. Audio record level, Here's my recommended settings, but again, feel free to mess with this and see what works for you. If you're not using any mics at all, set it to around 15. If you're using a shotgun mic, set it between 7 to 9. If you're using a lav mic, set it between 1 to 3. Tab 2, page 3, audio level display. I would keep this on just so it can show you if the mic levels are running. Wind noise reduction, never turn this on because this will make your audio sound like you're underwater. That was probably really a terrible effect. Marker display and marker settings. For cinematic vlogs, set the display to 235 by 1. This will trigger 2 white guidelines for you to frame your shot, so you can add black bars later to make your footage feel more cinematic. Movie with shutter. I would turn this on because this allows you to use your shutter button to record movies. Tab 2, page 4, silent shooting. This allows you to take photos without the shutter sound because it will take the photo electronically. Now there's a small percentage that your photo will come out a little wonky when you use this mode. It just depends on the situation you're in. If it does come out wonky, turn this off. Release without lens and card. I would enable this. This will prevent a message saying you don't have a lens or a memory card inserted. Steady shot. Turn this on. Now, if you mounted a lens without optical steady shot, this option will be grayed out. Tab 2, page 5. Now this page pertains only to video. Change the zoom setting to clear image zoom. This allows you to zoom with a prime lens or add an extra reach to zoom lenses without losing too much quality in your video. Best recommended to combine it with 4K video shooting. I'll show you how to program this later in the custom button section of this video. Moving on to tab 2, page 6. DISP button stands for display button. You can configure what info setting shows up on your LCD screen or viewfinder and toggle when they show up by pressing the up button on your camera. You can refer to the diagram next to the setting to see what they are. I personally recommend these settings to be checked, especially the leveler. It will show you if you're leveled with your composition. Now, Finder and Monitor is grayed out for me because I'm recording my screen with an external monitor right now, but basically, this manually toggles between the viewfinder and the LCD display. Finder frame rate, keep it on standard. Zebra settings. These are helpful lines that look like zebras that tells you which part of the scene is overexposed. I go more in depth with zebras in my How to Avoid Overexposure guide linked up here. Grid line, helpful lines that help you frame your shot. Exposure set guide, I would leave this on. Moving on to tab 2, page 7, live view display. Have setting effects on because this shows you what the picture or video will look like before you take the shot. I wouldn't recommend ever turning this off. Auto review, this I would turn off. If it's on, it will immediately show you the photo that you just took for a few seconds before going back to camera mode. I prefer to press the playback button on my camera to review the photos. Tab 2, page 8. This is the page where we'll be doing a majority of our button customization, so we'll come back to this in a few minutes. Let's go ahead and finish going over all of the other menu settings first. Skipping all the way down to dial and wheel setup, this is where you can decide which wheel changes aperture and which wheel changes shutter speed. Change it to what feels natural to you. Tab 2, page 9. AV/TV rotate. AV stands for aperture, TV stands for shutter speed. I would keep this at normal unless you want to reverse the direction to change your shutter speed or aperture. Yeah, weirdo. You can tell I'm a little delirious right now because I've been reading this whole script thing for like an hour now. Anyways, this comment shouldn't make it to the final edit. Dial and wheel EV composition. Yeah, definitely losing it right here. Turn this off. Function of touch operation. This is where you enable real-time focus tracking. Now, this is very exciting, okay? Set this to touch tracking and make sure later on to have touch operations turned on. This will create a focus tracking box on your subject so that the camera will keep focus on them. Movie button. Always have this on always because this allows you to record a movie with the side button regardless if you're in a photo mode. Dial wheel lock. I would just keep this unlocked. Audio signals. This gives you an audible prompt that you're either starting recording or stopping recording for movie. Now, I personally like to have this on because it lets me know if I'm recording, but other people might find this annoying, so they would turn this off. In my opinion, this is helpful for vloggers because it lets you know when the camera is rolling and when the camera stops recording. And before we move on, just a quick word from our sponsor. For 2019, Vivi and I really want to combine our hybrid shooting with travel. With Squarespace, we're able to rebuild our website with their clean templates. Everything's as simple as click and drag. Definitely check back in the next month to see our progress. However, you can try out Squarespace for yourself right now with a free trial. Whether you're building a portfolio or setting up an online shop, Squarespace is an all-in-one solution for you. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/JasonVong to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. You're welcome. See you guys in the next end card. Peace. Okay, so things are a little more downhill from here before it picks up again. So let's cruise through this. Tab 3, page 1. I'm going to show you how to send photos and videos to your smartphone later. For now, we can skip the rest. We can skip the rest of the stuff on tab 3. Tab 4, page 1. Yeah, we can actually skip most of these too since they pertain to playback. On page 2, make sure the enlarge initial magnification and position are set to standard and focus position. This just helps for when you're enlarging a photo during playback that you would see where the camera is focused on. Helpful to double check your focus of your photo. And with that, we can skip all of page 3 altogether as well. Moving on to tab 5, page 1. Monitor brightness. This is where you can make the LCD screen brighter. Helpful for when you're shooting in bright conditions and you really can't see your screen. You can also do this while you're shooting 4K videos now. Now, just a quick note, this will make your image or video on the LCD screen itself look super contrasty and overexposed, but it actually does not affect the image or video in any way. Just make sure you're checking the exposure meter. Viewfinder brightness, it's the same thing, but through the viewfinder, I left it on auto. Finder color temperature, I would not touch this. Gamma display assist. Okay, if you're shooting an S-Log or hybrid log gamma, this will help you see what your image will potentially look like after grading. This is helpful for double checking your white balance when you're shooting flat. Volume settings, this involves video playback only. It just controls the audio playback volume. Tile menu, leave that off. Tab 5, page 2. Mode dial guide. Now, if you're an absolute beginner, you can have this on to help you remember what the dials do. Delete confirmation. Always cancel first. That gives you the option to cancel first before you accidentally delete a photo. Trust me, you want to have this on. Display quality, keep this on standard. Power save time. You can set a timer for when the camera goes to sleep after a period of inactivity. Yeah, that sounds weird, but you know what I mean. Auto power off temperature. Okay, set this on high if you're planning on doing any long movie recording, like past 45 minutes long. What it does, it keeps the camera running even when the internal heat temperature is rising. Okay, don't freak out, okay? The A6400 has a new processor, so it has a much higher heat tolerance than the cameras before it. In my experience, it was able to fill up an entire 64GB SD card shooting 1 hour and 27 minutes of 4K, and the heating signal never came on. Though your experience may vary depending on your condition of your shooting situation. NTSC/PAL selector. If you're wondering why you don't have 24p or 120p, change your camera from PAL to NTSC. Tab 5, page 3, cleaning mode. This performs some sort of cleaning operation. Never really used it before. Touch operation. Now that I've definitely used. Turn this on because this activates the touch feature of the LCD screen. Touch panel and pad, have it on both. Touchpad settings, I kept this in their default settings, which you can see here on the screen. Demo mode, skip. TCUB settings, skip. Tab 5, page 4. Remote control. If you have an IR infrared remote, turn this on so you can trigger the shutter or movie recording with the remote. HDMI settings. If you're planning on using an external monitor, this is where you finesse with the settings. If you don't want the monitor or the TV to display your camera information and just show a clean camera feed, make sure you turn off info display. In my case, I do want to show you the camera information, so I left this on. 4K output select, memory card plus HDMI, USB connection, mass storage. When you update your firmware of the camera, the software will prompt you to have it on mass storage anyway. USB lens setting, skip that. USB power supply. You want to turn this on so you can charge your camera with the USB port on the side. Tab 5, page 5, PC remote setting. You know what? We can skip most of these on this page anyways because they're pretty self-explanatory. Except format, actually. Once you offload all the media to your computer, use format on the camera to wipe the SD card for best recording performance. Tab 5, page 6. Yeah, don't worry about any of these aside from set file name. You can actually set the first 3 letters of your photo file names to your initials or something. Tab 5, page 7, display media info, we can skip that. Version, this is just good to check what version your camera or lenses are. Do check the Sony site once in a while to see if there are any updates available so you can update your camera. Setting reset, this is where you factory reset your camera in case you want to redo all of your customization all over again. If that's the case, feel free to pull up my video again. Moving on to tab 6, My Menu. This is where you'll get to create your own menu. We just went through a long process, and there will be a lot of functions where we would never really have to change, but we would have to go through every time to find the ones that we need to change, so that can get really confusing. So for the small select ones that we always have to change, we can build it here directly in the My Menu section for quick access. These are the 5 that I personally fiddle with a lot. You will discover in time what you will need to have quick access to so you can build your own. Alright, here comes the start to the second section, the customization of buttons. So let's go ahead and focus on our custom buttons now. You will see we can customize the buttons to do very different things depending on which mode we are in. Starting off with photo mode, you'll see we have a helpful diagram letting us know which button we're changing. Now, on this first rear 1 page, number 1, I like using this first button here for Eye Autofocus because this is where it feels natural to me to hold it down before pressing the shutter. Keep in mind, you will have to hold down this button for the Eye Autofocus to track. For the second button, if you tick the toggle down, you can magically make this button do something else. Personally, I have it on AEL toggle, which stands for Auto Exposure Lock. I use Auto ISO quite often, and this just locks in my exposure once the camera automatically decides the best setting for me. For the third button, I have it for switch right and left eye. Now I have it on the trash can button so I can quickly choose the best eye of my subject to focus on. Now don't worry, this will not take away the delete function of your camera. It's because when you're in photo mode, the trash can button doesn't need to delete anything. When you're in playback mode, the trash can button will act like a trash can button. Moving on to the next page, rear number 2. For the first one, I have it on focus standard. This is the center button of the directional pad right here. Now this works in conjunction with focus. This works in conjunction with the focus area. By pressing this, I can quickly move my focus point around. Number 3 is ISO, which is the right button. Since the camera has it labeled as ISO on the body itself, I figured I just keep it the same so I don't get confused. Number 4, exposure compensation. Same reason as above, it's already labeled down here on the camera itself. This allows you to change the auto ISO setting, whether it should slightly over or underexpose a shot for you. Moving on to the next page, top C1. The C1 button, I have it on focus magnifier. This is for when I'm using a manual lens and I need to digitally punch into the subject that I need to acquire focus on. Moving on to the next page, lens. Now, certain lenses will have a button on them that can be used as custom buttons. Most APS-C lenses don't have a button at this moment, just full frame G Master lenses, which I just set it to Eye Autofocus as well. So don't worry about this too much if you don't have a lens that have a button on them. Coming back out to the menu for the video custom key part. Now, since we can't use certain photo features like Eye Autofocus when shooting videos, it wouldn't make sense to keep our buttons the same. So for the first one, I have it as autofocus, manual focus control toggle. Sometimes in video mode, I don't want the camera to constantly seek focus. So once I have my focus locked in, I can press this button to switch to manual focus. 2, it's the same thing as what I had it in photo mode, AEL toggle. I use auto ISO quite often, and this just locks in my exposure once the camera automatically decides the best setting for me. 3 is zoom. So this is the clear image zoom function I was talking about earlier. If you dial that in the settings from before, this will allow you to zoom with a prime lens or add an extra reach to your zoom lenses without losing too much quality in your video. Now, this is, again, best recommended to be combined when you're shooting 4K videos. Moving on to the next page, rear number 2. This is all the same as the photo ones that I've programmed earlier, since those features work in video mode as well. That's why they follow the photo custom key functions. Moving on to the next page, top. Again, I have it as focus magnifier. It just helps for whenever I need to manual focus in video mode. Moving on to lens. Again, since most APS-C lenses don't have a button on them, I did not bother changing this. Moving on to playback custom key. For the rear section, for the function button, I have it as send to smartphone. And I'll show you how to send photos and videos to your smartphone in just a bit, but set that for now. Moving on to the next page, top. For custom 1, for playback, I have it set to rating because this allows me to start the photos that I like on the spot so I can immediately pick them out on my computer and edit them without sorting all of my photos again. Alright, moving on to quick function menu customization. I designed 3 different sets of quick function menu for different needs. One strictly for photos, one strictly for video and filmmaking, and the third one a hybrid of both. Go ahead and watch it through and choose the best set that applies to you. So starting off for my photographer friends first. Now, some of these settings may feel a little redundant since we already have them on buttons, on custom buttons, but I personally like having them here as well so I can visually see what focus mode or focus area I'm in. So starting off with drive. Now, this is important. I feel like a lot of photographers jump from single shot to burst shots a lot, so that's why I have it. I have drive set to my quick function menu. White balance is obvious, focus mode, focus areas, those are obvious. Now I threw in silent shooting just in case you need to have quick access to silent shutter, in case you don't want to bother anybody when you're shooting photos. Right next to that is creative style, in case you do change your creative style a lot, whether it's to standard, neutral, or vivid. You can go ahead and swap that out for something else if you don't plan on changing your creative style too often. Moving on to the second row, RAW plus JPEG. Again, this is more of a visual indicator than a function. Sometimes I would switch out to JPEG and not realize that for my next shoot, so I end up shooting just JPEG and not RAW, which can be detrimental if you're a professional. So having this right here will give you a good indication as to what it is you're shooting and if you need to change it back to RAW plus JPEG or just strictly RAW. Right next to it is touch operation toggle. This is just in case if you are shooting with a viewfinder a lot and your nose is touching the screen, shifting your focus, you can go ahead and turn off touch operations until you need it again. Right next to it is smile shutter. That's pretty obvious. Right next to it is face autofocus. Sometimes I like to turn off face detection autofocus because maybe I'm shooting a building or a landscape, but there are people in the foreground. I definitely don't want the camera to focus on someone else's face and not the building or the landscape, so I like to have this right there. The grids, just to help me compose. Aspect ratio, just in case you do take advantage of the 3:2 resolution or 16:9 or 1:1. It's a quick way to switch between those if you need to. Moving on for my video homies, starting off with Gamma Display Assist. This is helpful for if you're shooting an S-Log or hybrid log gamma. This is just a great way to see what it would look like in a Rec 709 color space and to check your white balance. So if you don't shoot S-Log or hybrid log gamma, you can go ahead and take this out. White balance, focus mode, focus area, those are self-explanatory. Audio level, just in case you need to fiddle with your audio level, in case it's peaking or it's too soft, it's right there for you to change it. Right next to it is picture profiles. I feel like video shooters would probably tamper with this a lot more than creative style, so I have it right there. Moving on to the next row, touch operations, just in case you need to toggle that off or on. Zebra and peaking, those I feel are especially important for video shooters, so I threw that in the quick function menu. Face autofocus, again, just a great way to turn off face detection if you don't need it, but turn it back on for when you do. Grid to help me frame my shot, and marker display to enable the 2:3:5:1 white lines to help me frame my cinematic shots. And lastly, if you're a hybrid like I am, these are the settings for shooting both photos and videos. Okay, so welcome to the memory recall section. So memory recall is helpful to program a group of settings to be instantaneously available when needed. For example, let's say you like to jump between 4K and 1080p 120 frames per second a lot, but obviously it's cumbersome to go through all the settings in the menu to change the mode and adjust the shutter speed setting. So what you can actually do is set 4K 24 to memory 1 and 1080p 120 to memory 2. Now this is super duper important that you get everything right in the menu first before you lock it into a memory recall slot. So let's just say if I want 1080p 120, I'm gonna get that ready first. Then I set my shutter speed. Then I pull up a picture profile. Then I'm gonna double check my audio record level, making sure it's not too soft or too loud. Gonna also make sure if my focus settings are right, my focus areas are correct. So once you're ready, go to tab 1, page 4, select the second option, and choose which slot you want that setting to be in. Now you'll be able to cycle to your memory recall setting via the dial and pick the slot you need for the shot. Okay, now we're at sending photos and videos to smartphones. Ensure you have the Play Memories app downloaded on your mobile device. Then select your photo by pressing the function button during playback. You can do one or multiple, and it will show you the Wi-Fi password. You don't need to enter this password every time after the initial setup. Just type it in or use the QR code to save the Wi-Fi setting on your phone. After that, head to the app and the transfer will automatically initiate. Be sure to check out my playlist for more Sony Alpha tips and tricks. Guys, you made it through the entire video. Congratulations, and I cannot wait to see what you guys create with your Sony a6400. And if you plan on uploading them to Instagram, be sure to tag me in it at JasonVMedia. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.